So, Dr. Nyere, I'll start with you. From what the ANC is saying, it looks like it's all done. They are preparing for a Brics summit that will take place in South Africa. But according to the Deputy President Paul Mashatile, it looks like South Africa has decided it can't take the risk of hosting President Vladimir Putin. You know, the issue seems to be the acceptance or lack thereof of this decision by Russia. How does this complicate things for our government?
So you are right that the government of South Africa has confirmed. So through the Minister of International Relations, Dr. Nalendi Pandor, she has confirmed indeed that South Africa will be hosting the Brics summit. However, it is not clear yet whether President Putin would attend. But here are the scenarios that could play out. The first one would be Putin sending his representative. And this one is highly unlikely. If you look at the diplomatic precedence, when it comes to the high panel delegations such as Brics, it is normally the head of state who would attend. And therefore, we would want to park that idea to say President Putin is very much unlikely to send his representative. Therefore, we are left with two options. And the two options would be the first one, whether or not President Putin will attend virtually. And clearly, the Russians are not for that idea. So already it presents another challenge. If President Putin is to refuse to attend virtually, then it means the only option here will be for President Putin to attend in person. And there starts the trouble for South Africa if he decides to do so.
Professor Koma, what are the chances that Putin will be persuaded not to attend this Brics summit in person?
Yes, thanks. Clement, I share the sentiments expressed by Dr. Nyere in terms of plotting the scenario. So, South Africa is bound by the Rome Statute. We are a signatory to, and South Africa ratified the statute. And now we are faced with a court precedent. You remember in 2016, the High Court and also later the Supreme Court ruled on the Omar al-Bashir matter, who was also facing an arrest which was issued by the International Criminal Court. So in part, the High Court ruled that failure by the South African government to effect the arrest of Omar al-Bashir, then the president of Sudan, was inconsistent with the obligations imposed on South Africa arising from the Rome Statute, and it was unlawful. So it would be risky for the South African government to be viewed as a constitutional delinquent in the event President Putin lands on the shores of South Africa and South Africa fails to effect the arrest. So what I'm anticipating, of course, is Putin agreeing to attend the Brics summit virtually, because part of the bilateral engagement between President Ramaphosa and also President Putin is to basically tell him the eventuality, to say if you happen to land in South Africa in person, the South African Police Service is constitutionally bound to effect the arrest, because that arises from the obligations imposed on South Africa as per the Rome Statute.
Yeah, and Dr. Nyere, all of this information has already been given to President Vladimir Putin. I think by now he understands how complicated this situation is for South Africa. The various options that we know of, I imagine, have already been presented to him. And yet, from what the Deputy President had to say, is that Russia seems to want to push for him to really arrive. And government has already invited him. So if they uninvite him, seeing that they can't persuade him to either attend virtually or send a representative, uninviting him, could that cause diplomatic tensions with Russia?
Definitely, that would cause diplomatic tensions with Russia. Maybe let's just historicize a bit here. So the government of Russia goes way back with the ANC government. So the ANC, before it even came into government, it had relations with Russia, and Russia is known to have supported the ANC during the struggle against apartheid. So there are many ties that are already there, and this is exactly what presents the dilemma for South Africa. In the event that President Putin does land here, maybe let's look at the consequences. The consequences, in spite of South Africa being seen as a constitutional delinquent, which I don't think South Africa wants to taint itself in that way. But should President Putin insist on coming, because he has been already invited, there are some repercussions that are not necessarily legal, rather political and economic. So we have seen, particularly by NATO states, and the chief of NATO states, I dare say, is the United States of America. While it is also not a member of the Rome Statute, but it has, if you like, some influence and power over the outcomes of the ICC. So chances are, if President Putin does indeed come to South Africa, maybe nothing would happen legally, right? Because it will be a choice for South Africa to arrest President Putin or not. So should they not arrest him, I liked what Professor Koma alluded to, that we have a legal precedent in terms of this political playing out before. President al-Bashir was not arrested. In fact, he was assisted to escape out of South Africa. It could play out again. However, there will be serious economic consequences. We have already seen that South Africa has been threatened by expulsion from the AGOA agreement, precisely because it was believed that South Africa sold arms to Russia. Of course, that is conjecture until it is proven, but we know there are economic consequences that would really be dealt heavily to South Africa should President Putin come and not be arrested.
Professor Koma, how do you think Putin expects our government to handle this? We know his views about the ICC, about the West as well. That's also really been putting pressure on the South African government to effect the arrest as per the obligation it has to the ICC. Does he want, you think, South Africa to turn against its obligation to the ICC as a signatory and show the West the middle finger?
Yes, he may want to push South Africa to that corner. But you remember, South Africa is not a sub-state of any state. South Africa is a sovereign state. In 1998, it deemed it fit to be party to the signatory of the Rome Statute and later ratified the statute. It is bound by the obligations arising from the Rome Statute. And this is the message that the South African president is now trying to communicate to Putin. Remember, initially when this issue came to the fore, South Africa was exploring the issue of granting him diplomatic immunity. And later they realized that that will not work out because that is inconsistent with the decision of the High Court and later reaffirmed by the Supreme Court of Appeal. We are stuck with that decision on this particular matter. So we no longer have any other option on the part of the South African government except to persuade President Putin to attend the summit virtually, which I think that will be the ultimate eventuality. Because remember, if we cast our mind back on two occasions, when former President Zuma was inaugurated, an invitation was extended to Omar al-Bashir, then President of Sudan. The Sudan government inquired with South African government that if Omar al-Bashir eventually attends, what will be the implications? Will he be liable for arrest? And I remember then the former DG of DECO expressed that if Omar al-Bashir lands on our shores in terms of the provision of the Rome Statute, the South African government will have to effect his arrest and detain him at the nearest police station and later surrender him to the International Criminal Court. And later, with the funeral of the late president of South Africa, Mandela, the same. Omar al-Bashir was supposed to attend, but because of that criminal liability, he opted not to attend. So the court decision adds to these serious implications for Putin if he happens to defy the president of South Africa and also take a decision to come to South Africa in person. That would be the eventuality, ultimately.
Yeah. And Dr. Nyere, why is it important for our government to be quite cautious with how it approaches this matter? Because they don't want to go against the law and be found wanting again by the courts after what happened with Omar al-Bashir, but they also don't want to alienate Putin.
That's correct. So maybe if we look into the nature of the relationship between Russia and South Africa, it could actually tell us in terms of what will eventually happen, which is highly likely that President Putin will have to volunteer to be absent in person. So it has to come from President Putin. And I am bringing the relationship, the nature of the relationship, because we have been comrades in terms of South Africa and Russia on many fronts, particularly on issues around colonialism and apartheid. We know for a fact that Russia is an ally. So we have a common enemy. And the common enemy here will be Western imperialism. And part of Western imperialism would be to use institutions, global institutions, such as the ICC, to effect this kind of arrest. So if you like, the ICC knows exactly where the issues are. In other words, the United States of America and NATO, if they really wanted to arrest Putin, they know where he is, they would do so. But they are not doing that. They are simply playing into politicking here. They want an African state to make the arrest, which I do not think is likely to happen. President Putin is quite aware of the politicking around the issue, and therefore I think that President Putin will have to volunteer not to attend in person.
All right, Dr. Chidochashe Nyere from the University of Johannesburg, an international law expert, Professor Sam Koma. Thanks to both of you for making time for us.